Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics, people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Nichriadon, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Hello and welcome to episode 193 of Life Beyond the Numbers. And this episode is going out on Saturday, January 4th, 2025. So it is the first episode of 2025. And if you're listening to this episode in January 2025, then Happy New Year to you. What does the year have in store for you? 2025. It kind of blows my mind that this century is already a quarter of a century old. Like it's the silver jubilee of this century. So there's somewhat of an uplifting, celebratory tone to the year. Or is there? Well, let's see what the year brings. And this solo episode is inspired by three things that I did over the Christmas break. A movie that I saw and two exhibitions that I visited. First, an exhibition. I went to see an exhibition in the Bodleian Library called Write, Cut, Rewrite. And this exhibition showed the art of creating in progress. There were versions of an author trying to get to the right first line, or a poet, and trying to work out the end of their story, their novel, their poem. It kind of showed the messiness behind the scenes, the writing, the scribbling out, the rewriting, all of this that goes on that you don't really think about when you sit down to read a book. And if, like me, you love to read, sometimes the words can just carry you away and you think, wow, this is so incredible. How could anyone come up with this? Well, perhaps it took them a very long time. Days, weeks, months. I was particularly struck by some sheets of music that were there from the composer Bach. And apparently Bach had to come up with a new composition for a service every single Sunday. And so that meant writing and cutting and rewriting constantly. And there were some pieces of music there, sheets, that were just so scribbled out. It looked like complete anger coming out in the process. Life is a bit like this. Write, cut, rewrite. We see the end result. We see the person outside the home. We see the person in the role. We see the person we meet on the street. We don't know what goes on to get the person to where they are today. We never know what's going on inside somebody's heads, inside their bodies. And all of us are probably in this process of writing, cutting and rewriting as we go through our lives. It's okay to rewrite as you go. It's okay to change your mind, scribble out something, move jobs, even if it's after 2 months because you don't like a new one that you've just taken. Not everything is going to work out as it did in our minds, in our plans. So learning the process of iteration, recreation, throwing things out, letting things go, beginning again, is part of life. And I don't think things that we do are ever a wasted effort as such. Sure, we can go down the wrong path for a while, climb the wrong ladder, whatever metaphor you want to use. But everything is helping us to become the person that we're becoming, to become that full story that we will share with others. Maybe not the edited version, but the end result. And this time of the year, I'm not really one for resolutions. I like to spend a little bit of time on reflection. And reflection is something I do throughout the year. I put a little bit more effort into it at this time of the year though. And in particular, look back at the year and then use that to look forward. And it reminds me of something that David White writes about maturity in Consolations 1, because there's a Consolations 2 out now. His essay Maturity, he states, maturity is the ability to live fully and equally in multiple contexts, most especially the ability, despite our many griefs and losses, to courageously inhabit the past, the present, and the future all at once. And in the present moment, I guess, I'm using the past to help me to think about the future. When I think about reflection, I have a process that I like to call my 3 R's. So I reflect, I review, and I hope that reveals something. There's something about certainly if you keep a journal, and it's not something I do every single day, but it's something that I tend to do quite often. And I'll often, as I write, surface things that maybe I'm not consciously thinking about, or something that I'm consciously thinking about, I will go into it in more detail to see if I can surface things. And the funny thing that I find when I look back over my year of writing is I'm often writing the same thing over and over again. And there's something in that. There's something that I want to pay attention to. And perhaps sometimes the act of writing it just takes it out of my conscious mind for now. But actually, when I take time and effort at this time of the year to really look at some of the things that I've written several times throughout the year, it reveals something more to me. Perhaps a desire or a dream, a wish, a hope, a pattern of a habit I might like to do something about but still haven't quite figured out how to. I'm giving myself a chance, I guess, to write, cut and rewrite. And I'm surfacing some of those known unknowns and unknown knowns that I have floating around, and I'm putting a little bit more attention to them. And over the years, this has helped me a great deal to actually do stuff that I've been talking about forever. And it's not that procrastination is something that's high up on my list. It's just, I think sometimes things get in the way. Things happen. And that's the thing about plans. No matter how much we want to do something or to achieve something, things will arise that will take us off course. But that's okay. That's okay. And a couple of years ago, I remember hearing on a podcast Angus Fletcher, who talks about storytelling, and he was on Change Stories with Dr. Suzanne Evans, who, if you listen to this podcast, you'll have come across a couple of times. And he said something to her, and I've included this in my own book: every day is a possibility to discover a new story. Let me say that again. Every day is a possibility to discover a new story. And this is the write or the rewrite. So every day we have an opportunity to start again. Every moment, every hour, we can just write something new. And that sounds really simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy, because our brain is used to doing the familiar, and our brain likes to do the familiar. When our brain is concerned with keeping us alive and helping us to survive, then it wants to conserve our energy. And anything new that we do can sometimes feel uncomfortable and uncertain, and that requires energy. I came across a quote over Christmas that takes that every day is a possibility to discover a new story and almost put new life into it. And this is in a book called Vibration by Penney Peirce. Any given moment contains unlimited futures that become real. The reality that occurs is the one that you pay attention to. So any given moment contains unlimited futures. Unlimited futures. Will I go right or left, straight ahead or back? Simple, at a crossroads. Just think about a crossroads. There are 4 ways you can go, especially if you don't know which way you're supposed to be going. Whichever way you choose is going to take you somewhere else. So again, where you are now, the direction that you're going, you can change. And I think that's something about a new year, is it often forces us to ask some of those questions. Maybe it doesn't force, because that's not a great word, is it? But it surfaces some of these reservations perhaps that we have. Am I going to go into this job for another year? Am I really going to go another year without visiting that friend? Is this year the year I'm going to run my first half marathon? That's the other thing, is we can have multiple stories going on at once. So whether you're setting a similar direction or a brand new one, there may be things to write, cut and rewrite as you go. And that is where reflection, in particular written reflection, comes in really handy, because you can reflect by writing, then you can review what you've written, and that will reveal things to you that you maybe didn't really know. And what is certainty anyway? Are we ever certain of anything? I mean, they say there are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. I think we probably can be certain about other things, and there are degrees of certainty. We can be sure about something, as we'd say in Ireland, to be sure, to be sure. And as my friend David Lee would say, again, if you listen to this podcast, you will be familiar with David. Have you ever been dead certain and dead wrong? I'm not certain about this, but I'm pretty sure that he got that reference from somewhere else. But it's a good one, because oftentimes we will be really certain about something, but also not certain at all. But the movie Conclave, which I saw over the holiday period, and if you have seen it, what did you think about it? If you haven't seen it, I think it is worth a watch. It was quite fascinating, and there's amazing cinematography. But there was one speech in it that pretty much stopped me in my tracks. It was given by the guy who was in charge of this whole conclave. And he started off speaking in Latin, and then he stopped midway and said he wanted to speak from the heart. Part of his speech, he said, "There is one sin which I've come to fear above all others: certainty. Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance. Our faith is a living thing precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery, and therefore no need for faith." That was the gist of it. I like that because I agree that we become entrenched in certain views about the world, and that can cause great division, as we see it happening in the world around us all the time. But what if in our workplaces, when one person is absolutely certain that this is the correct course of action, and somebody else is saying, no, we've got to try this thing? Certainty often stops us from writing, cutting, and rewriting. Voltaire said that doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. And when he talks about doubt not being a pleasant condition, well, what if we say doubt is unpleasant? And unpleasant is something like uncomfortable. And so we don't really like doubt often. We want to be certain about our courses of action. But we can never be certain because we're predicting what's going to happen next. We're always making predictions. And perhaps the certainty feels nice if we think we're certain about something. And sometimes I think we can be. So don't get me wrong, I think sometimes there's a gut that says, yes, just go for it. We still can't be certain of the outcome, but it just feels like the right thing to do. There's information in that feeling, as there is information in the feeling of something being uncomfortable or unpleasant. Just because it's uncomfortable or unpleasant, that does not mean it isn't worth doing either. It's just information. And it might mean that it's just going to feel a bit like that for a while you adjust. And again, your brain is trying to keep you safe. It's trying to conserve energy. So it's discouraging you sometimes. And it seeks certainty rather than acting in the face of doubts. And there's a new book, I don't know how new it is actually, but I think it's pretty new. It's called The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate Chance, Ignorance, Risk and Luck by David Spiegelhalter. And he says that certainty and uncertainty are personal and they are a relationship. So we can have different degrees of certainty or uncertainty about exactly the same thing because we have different knowledge or perspectives. So I like this because I like the fact that we all respond to certainty or uncertainty differently based on our own uniqueness. So how much information is in a room when we're trying to make a decision? Even if, for example, we're both certain about the same thing, we may have reached our feeling of certainty differently. And he shares a thought experiment in the book, which I think, given where we are in the quarter of a century mark, it's also quite interesting to do. Just trying to find it. So, try this thought experiment. And if any of you have the book, it's on page 23. Note the time and date and close your eyes. Think of what you will be doing in 1 minute. Now try 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, 20 years. I'm going to add 25 years to that, just because that will be half a century. It's kind of easy for us to think about what we will be doing in a minute from now. Maybe even 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour or a day, perhaps a week. But a year? Or 20 years? Or 25 years? He says the future possibilities spread outward like strands of spaghetti. Which brings me back to that Penney Peirce quote about possibilities, like multiple possibilities in any given moment. There's something quite empowering about that. Change can happen in an instant, and it often does. But there can be multiple changes all the time. So what will you achieve in the next year? If today was the 4th of January 2026, what would you like to be saying about 2025? 2025 was the year that I ... I'd love to hear. And he goes on to further this thought experiment and says, now, try to remember, what were you doing exactly 1 day ago, 1 year ago, 10 years ago? And looking back is a bit different to looking forward. He says, like, we can figure out what we did in the past. We may not recall the specifics right away. And a lot of our past actually just fades into a kind of a rather indistinct blur. So I'm going to add 25 years ago to that. Because it did make me think, well, where was I a quarter of a century ago? We had just entered the year 2000. Let's all meet up in the year 2000. Won't it be great when we're all fully grown? I think actually, won't it be strange when we're all fully grown? That's just a quick memory that popped into my head. Pulp. But 25 years ago, January 2000, I was working in Dublin, in Deloitte. And I was coming towards the end of my 3.5-year training contract. I had done all my exams and was qualified technically. And if you had asked me to predict where I would be in 2025 or predict what I would have done in those 25 years, like, I mean, I would never, ever, ever have imagined all of the things that I have done. Some of them maybe, but most of them not in my wildest dreams. So today, in January 2025, who the hell knows what I will have done between now and 2050. And the same goes for you. That is exciting. That is something to celebrate. And look, we may or may not be here. The world may or may not be here. That is the thing. We are not certain. We are full of doubts, but we keep going. Which brings me to the last part of this episode. And this was as a slight jumping off point was, if there was only certainty, this is from the conclave speech again, if there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery and therefore no need for faith. So what of the role of mystery or magic, or is it mayhem, in our lives? And that brings me to the second exhibition that I visited, which was called Omens, Oracles and Answers. It was a really cool exhibition. Again, it was on in the Bodleian Library here in Oxford. So if you're around, it's there until April. The Cut Rewrite one finishes the first weekend in January. But Omens, Oracles and Answers had different ways that people got answers for the questions that they had, or the choices that they were trying to make, or the decisions that they were trying to make through history. And in fact, for at least 5,000 years, questions have been answered by fortune tellers and diviners, like through astrology and numerology and tarot and these different things. And diviners all address the same human needs: the promise of revealing hidden knowledge to help us overcome doubts and make our decisions. And divination is a personalised tool for reflection during periods of indecision. And it can be on a spectrum of just playfulness right through to being really serious. And it's for the times that we cannot be with not knowing. We want to act now. We can spend a lot of time and energy consumed with making the right decision. Some of the bigger decisions in life and the bigger life questions, like, is this the right role for me? Am I in the right career? What if I start this new business? What if I get married? What if I buy this house? All of these questions, to be or not to be, to do or not to do, can wreak havoc with our energy. And we can drive ourselves a little bit mad. What I like about this, the magic aspect, or the mysterious aspect, if you like, mystical perhaps, is that divination, no matter what you think of it, can help us to stop dithering. This is what they said at the exhibition, to clarify what we don't want, and can be helpful to get advice even if we don't follow it. And one thing I find really helpful, and I can't remember where I came across this, but it wasn't my idea, that's for sure, is to toss a coin. And honestly, if you have a decision and it's an either or type decision, do I do this or do I do that? You kind of know what you want to do. But there's a part of you that's really not sure. But as we're finding out, we're never really sure anyway. So you've got to take a chance. If you toss a coin, heads I'll do it, tails I won't. You know when that coin is tossed, if it comes up heads, you do it, and you don't want to do it, then you won't want to do it. It may be a pretty crude way of choosing, but it's going to give you information. And that's really what you're looking for. You're looking for some information. Is this the right thing? Is this what I should do? As I went into the omens, oracles and answers, there's a spinning wheel as you go in the door. And it tells you to take a spin on the wheel, use the number that comes up when you spin the wheel to find your answer as you go through the exhibition. So I spun the wheel and I came up with the number 62. I eventually found 62, and this was the message. If you knew how briefly this hardship will last, you would be glad to have endured the suffering that has passed. So that's maybe a little bit vague. But perhaps if I wanted to, I could sit down and think about, okay, so is there something at the moment that's bothering me? And actually, it's going to pass, like most things do. So maybe you're not going to go out and get your palms read or start doing tarot cards or anything like that. But there are things that you can do. And I think you can just look for signs. What I found really amusing was when I came out of that Oracles exhibition, I was standing on the street taking a photograph, and two people passed me and they were chatting, and I overheard one saying to the other, they were on their way into a bookshop at the time, if it's in here, then it's meant to be. And I thought, wow, we do incorporate all of these things, whether they're superstitions about the weather, red sky at night, shepherd's delight, red sky in the morning, shepherd's warning. But we do have all of these things in our culture, ways to help us decide what we're going to do. If you ask someone or you ask the world to help you, you'll be surprised what gets thrown back at you. Thrown sounds really funny, but what might manifest itself. Oh, another word that's loaded, I think. Okay, so I'm going to just talk about street wisdom for a moment. And street wisdom, you can look this up, it's a thing. But you take to the streets with a question. Don't use your phone, you just wander. And there's a lovely book called Wonderful by David Pearl. And it's basically find wonder in the everyday, every day. But the concept being that you have a question on your mind and you go out to the street with that question. You might walk for an hour, let's just say. Give yourself an hour and you walk. And there may be a sign in a window that says something that just hits the mark for you. You might overhear somebody on the street saying something. It may be a street sign. It may be a crack on the pavement. Who knows? And the idea here isn't that they're actually giving you the message, but what's happening in your brain is your brain is thinking about this question that you have. It's searching for answers. It's trying to make predictions, because that's what we do. We make predictions. And it's going to make meaning out of things. So if it sees something that resonates with what's going on in your head, then it's going to help you find meaning. And one example for me, I remember one day I was out walking and I was thinking about ripples, making ripples. And this is a few years ago now, but I was on the Thames Path. And I got almost to the end of my walk and nothing had really struck me. And then out of the corner of my eye, there was a boat, obviously, on the Thames. Well, not obviously, but there's lots of houseboats. And there was a houseboat. And on the side of the boat was written, "Make a splash." That just really struck me, because I was like, that's what I want to do. It's not about the ripples, it's about the splash. And that just got me into a whole new way of thinking. And I think this is one of the things, is that we're going round and round in our heads with the same thing. And movement is a fantastic way of changing our thought processes and our thought patterns. And if you're sitting at your desk or sitting in a living room or a kitchen and you're trying to think this thing to death, then get up and move around, because everything will start wiring and firing differently as you do that. And you're just giving yourself a bit of a break, a bit of a fresh start, a bit of a right cut, rewrite moment. And you never know what you will uncover. Before we go, I consult with the cards sometimes, and I just have some cards, and they're for fun, especially on the morning that I get up and I get to my desk and I'm just a bit like about something. And I have these beautiful roomy oracle cards, and they're by Alana Fairchild, and they're an invitation into the heart of the divine. So what I'm going to do before we go is, and this is what I do, is I just shuffle the cards. So I'm going to be shuffling these cards for a moment here. You can hear it happening. And as I shuffle these cards, usually one just surfaces. It either falls out of the pack, or it turns itself upside down, or does some sort of a somersault. And then I just go with that. And it often gives me something for the day, something to think about, and kind of shifts something in me. And funnily enough, as I'm shuffling these cards, a friend of mine was here a few months ago, and she took out the pack and she shuffled the cards, or I don't know how she did it actually, but the card self-selected. She didn't like it. She read it and she was like, no, that's not for me. So she put it back into the pack and she redid the whole thing again, and the exact same card came out. And it was great because we actually started a conversation about the content of that card, and it surfaced some things for her. So look, I think the thing about it is you never know what's going to happen. There are multiple possibilities in any moment. Ooh, and with that, one card popped out. So this card is Dance of the Divine Feminine. There's a quote: "How bitter the taste of water would be if the river stopped its flow." And underneath, there's a little paragraph that I will read out. And my hope today reading this is that somebody somewhere listening to this, of which I cannot be certain, may get something from it that helps them with something on their mind. The universe esteems you capable of more than being sure-footed and sensible. You can whirl and stumble, inspired by the music of the spheres. There is big magic for you to weave this lifetime. Prosaic priorities inherited from the world are stuff and nonsense. Give up the mainstays that drain your heart. Ask your soul what matters most and attend to that. Wow. I mean, I actually find that sent a shiver down through me. So, I hope you're still with me. This is something I'm never sure about or certain. Does anyone listen? And I know people do. That's not fair. I know people do. And it's great. I love hearing from people. If you get something from these episodes, let me know, or tell somebody else, leave a review. Always helps. My hope for all of you, dear listeners, is for 2025, you enjoy stepping into your unknown, uncovering some of your known unknowns or unknown knowns, and really getting to a place where you know what you want, what matters most. I wish you a prosperous and peaceful 2025. Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring, the human side of work life.